So hello everybody. I hope that all you're doing well, that you're healthy and taking care of your older relatives who might be more vulnerable. Uh, Today I'm gonna give you some brief overview lecture about the problem of the business cycle. And unfortunately that's one extremely uh, relevant topic in our daily politics, that America is on the verge of a major recession right now. It's not clear how sharp, and how deep it's going to be, but all economic forecasts now say that economic recession is almost unavoidable in the second quarter of this year and potentially in the third quarter. So we have to chat a little bit about the definition of the basic terms. What is the business cycle? What causes the business cycle? Whether governments could do anything about the business cycle, if yes, what and how? Is the business cycle a modern phenomenon, characteristic only of highly developed industrial societies, or something that existed forever, and so on and so forth? So let's start first from the basic definition, and we will go work from there towards more details and more detailed analysis of the phenomenon itself. So the business cycle is always defined as a short-term fluctuation in the level of the business activity, in the level of economic activity. So that means that business cycle refers to a phenomenon that all modern economies develop in a sequence that always goes with a period of high economic growth, or positive economic growth at any rate, followed by a shorter or longer period of a negative growth, which is called recessions in theory, or contractions. And then the economic growth would recover and start all over again. So that's the business cycle, is this cycle of the periods of positive economic growth, which are called expansions, and the periods of slump or contraction or recession, which is called recessions. The second definition that we here need is definition of the long-term economic growth. So we have to sharply distinguish between the short-term business fluctuations and long-term economic trends. So if you look at the graph, I think that I've shown you that graph once in class before, the so-called hockey stick graph. The graph of the long-term economic development and growth in the world from the beginning of civilization until today. And judging by everything that we know by now, the economies of the world were pretty much stagnant until about mid-18th century, early to mid-18th century. So you had periods of economic growth that would then go down, and then will recover once again and go down, but that was just a variation around the mean, variation around essentially a zero trend over time. So that practically means that workers and peasants and average people, and even the well-born aristocrats and merchants in, let's say, 17th century Europe were not wealthier than their counterparts in the Roman Empire, or in the Persian Empire, or in the ancient Greek city-states. So the phenomenon of economic growth is a new phenomenon. So it starts shooting up in the 18th century. So hence the hockey stick. You have the handle of the hockey stick, which is flat for forever, and then in the 18th century, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it starts increasing like this. So the long-term trend, so this blade of the hockey stick is a graphical representation of the very high rates of economic growth on the long-term basis in the Western world and in recent decades in other parts of the world as well. However, the pace and the path of this long-term economic growth is uneven. The phenomenon of business cycle refers to the problem that this long-term positive trend is not even uninterrupted flat. It's not just like a flat handle, a flat blade of the hockey stick. It's rather a wobbly or curvy hockey stick blade. It consists of the periods of a very high economic growth followed up by recessions, and then you have a expansion and you have a recession, and it ratchets up over time, but it's uneven. It's interrupted by the periods of uh, economic contraction. So now you might think to yourself, okay, what's the problem with that? Why is that? Why is that a theoretical scandal? Why is that a problem? Why is that something that requires a study? And the reason for why that might be a problem is as follows. So think for a moment about an economy like an American economy or any other economy from an individual entrepreneur's point of view. So you always know that the profit and loss system weed out unsuccessful entrepreneurs from successful entrepreneurs. So we have studied sufficiently the phenomenon of the functioning of the price mechanism and the entrepreneurship in order to understand that the price mechanism and the markets are very, very efficient and even ruthless in punishing people who don't know how to work with capital. So entrepreneurs are people who are entrusted scarce resources to use them to produce the goods and services that society needs. If they succeed in doing so, they're rewarded by profit. If they fail, they are punished by losses. So at any one given point in time, you will have this process of quasi-Darwinian natural selection operating in the real markets, weeding out, eliminating, minimizing the influence of unsuccessful entrepreneurs and building up and rewarding the successful ones. So what entrepreneurs do, who are the entrepreneurs? Then those are people who specialize in using scarce resources to produce useful consumer goods that consumers want to buy. So you don't have any reason whatsoever to believe that all of these people who are essentially trained on an everyday basis by the market to be good, to be successful, to be productive, you don't have any reason to believe that all of a sudden all of them could start to fail. And that's exactly what happens in a recession. Expansion is a period of economic growth in which most entrepreneurs make good decisions. The rate of business failure in any one particular point in time during normal times is relatively low. And it's relatively quickly disposed of. All entrepreneurs who are not good and efficient, they're relatively efficiently and quickly disposed of by the market. So now you would have expected actually the efficiency of the market system to increase over time, and what is more important, the efficiency of the surviving entrepreneurs and surviving business corporations and firms to improve over time. And now what happens in a recession? When I describe a recession to you, and when you look through the window and when you open the newspapers and television, you see that strange things start happening in a recession here, that you have a complete decline in the level of economic activity across the entire economic system. That all entrepreneurs, good ones, bad ones, start losing money. That revenues are going down. That profit rates are going down. That people get fired from both successful corporate enterprises and less successful corporate enterprises. So the same businessmen who were very good in predicting the consumer demand and adjusting the structure of production of the economy to these anticipated consumer demand, who were making very few grave mistakes. And if they made them, they would have been punished very quickly, efficiently, and ruthlessly by the market. Now, all of a sudden, all of them start making mistakes, all in the same direction, and all of them in the same time. All of them start losing money. All of them now resemble this tiny minority of losers and failures among the entrepreneurs in normal times. So this doesn't make any sense when you look from a normal economic point of view. So we're taught always, you remember this definition, methodological individualism. Whenever you want to explain economic reality, you have to start from an individual economic actor. And you have to explain the complex and complicated phenomena by trying to reduce them to individual decisions, individual values, individual principles, individual preferences of consumers and producers. So now we have to study the economy starting from an individual entrepreneurial point of view, and if we do so, we cannot make any sense whatsoever of a recession. Recession looks like an impossible event. How come that the same those geniuses who excelled on the market in making excellent decisions, in making decisions that satisfied consumer demand very promptly and very efficiently, now overnight, so to speak, become a bunch of failures and losers who cannot predict what's going to happen, who lose money on a large scale, who lose the markets, who produce too much stuff, much more stuff than could be sold, who cannot predict the uh, shape of the demand curves, the prices of goods and services that they can achieve on the market, and so on. So this is a deep problem. You see now that this microeconomic analysis of the market process simply uh, is not consistent with what we see at the macroeconomic level. So we need some explanation. How is it possible that the same people who were very successful until yesterday now become unsuccessful, incapable of predicting the consumer demand, incapable of satisfying it in a timely fashion in a very brief period of time? So that's the reason why the business cycle is a puzzling and complicated phenomenon, because at the most basic level of economic analysis, it clashes with the certain basic principles of economic analysis. Now, what are the theory? How are we to explain business cycle? What are the approaches to explaining the business cycle? There are a variety of different approaches, and they could be classified into two basic camps or two basic approaches. The first one says it's the market's fault. There is some hidden failure, there is some hidden glitch in the market system, in this price system and entrepreneurial market system that we studied thus far, and that we have went at great length in our need to understand it. There is some glitch there that then explains why this sudden cluster of errors, so to speak, so that's called in the business cycle theory cluster of errors, that all people clustered together start making the same mistakes in the same time. And if you assume this, then the two possibilities exist. One is actually nothing could be done. Okay, the world is an imperfect place. The market reflects the general human imperfection. Get over it. We cannot do anything about it. So this was a general approach that people had in the 19th century. Business cycle is just like a weather disaster or the health disaster like a virus that we are now experiencing. Wait until it passes and then go about your life, go about living your life in the same way you did before. So nothing could be done. The second consequence of this is, or the second possible interpretation of the alleged culpability of the markets for the business cycle, is to say, no. Actually, the government is here to help. The government can solve this problem. There is a failure in the market, but our tools of modern macroeconomic analysis allow us to identify these problems, the reasons why market fails, and to fix them by using government policy. And this is the approach, I must say, that dominates modern societies, and you can see it in a very clear display today in the American Congress, when the American Congress enacted a so-called fiscal stimulus bill worth $2 trillion in order to help the American economy recover from a recession. So you'll see in a second what is the fiscal stimulus, what is the fiscal policy, what does fiscal policy mean? But this family of approaches that say it's market's fault, there is a mistake in the market and government can fix it, that's the dominant policy approach or the dominant interpretation of the problem of business cycle in the modern world. So what are these two approaches to the business cycle that emphasize the active role of government in smoothing out business cycle, in moderating the business cycle, if not completely eliminating it? The first is monetary policy, the second is fiscal policy. What is monetary policy? Monetary policy is using the printing press, using the money making and money printing powers that the federal government has, primarily the Federal Reserve System, to increase the money supply in the economy, to increase thereby the amount of total amount of spending in the economy in order to stimulate the economy, overcome the economic problem. Simply throw the money on the people and hope that they're going to spend money and stimulate then production of consumers' goods that they want to buy. You can do it in two ways, or more than two ways, but in two principal ways that monetary policy could be done. Number one, you could try and influence interest rates, which means that you can lower the interest rates at which the central bank lends the money to commercial banks. The second element, the second approach is, and then the commercial banks in a situation of crisis can borrow more money from the central bank and from each other. You can decrease their mandatory reserves that they keep. So you know that the banking system functions in such a way as that the central bank prescribes the minimum amount of reserves, how much money, how much demand deposits of your customers you have to keep in reserve, and how much you can lend out. So if you want to stimulate the money supply increase, you can say to the banks, okay, your minimum reserves were 12% of the demand deposits, now you can lower it down to 8%. So now you free up additional cash that could be used to create new loans, and by creating new loans to stimulate the economy. So that's one approach. The second approach is actually to create new money out of thin air, in a sense. So that's what Federal Reserve System is doing right now. So they promised to create $1.5 trillion of new money. How would they do it? It's very simple. They would buy government bonds. So government bonds are the way in which the government increases public debt. All kinds of individual investors and institutional investors, such as banks and insurance companies, keep government bonds. They buy them, and they receive the principal plus interest at maturity. So then the central bank does the following. It says, I'm going to buy $1 trillion of these bonds. And you collect the bonds and promise the payments to private institutions and investors. And once this is done, you simply just give them the money, create money by a click of a mouse. You credit their debit accounts with additional money, and that's money that they have. And they can now recycle this money through the entire economic system. And usually if you inject $1 trillion of money, it's going to create 8, 10, or 12 trillion additional dollars in new cash by recycling it through the through the economic system. So how does that function? So I don't have time now to go over all of this. Why and how the private commercial banking system can increase and does increase the initial monetary stimulus, initial amount of money that the central bank creates. But that's a fact. That's a fact of monetary policy. So that's one approach. Monetary policy in a variety of ways that I described. The second approach is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy means using taxes and spending as a way of stimulating the demand. So it's always almost all activist approaches to solving the problem of business cycle. They always want to stimulate the demand, aggregate demand as it is called. The total demand, total amount of money that people will have to spend. So the total spending is always stimulated, and you expect, you hope that this increased demand then will stimulate supply, will stimulate production. Your real problem is actually lowered production. That's what worries you. But you don't see any obvious and immediate way to prop up production in the short run. So you think to yourself that maybe the most efficient way would have been to give more money in this or that way to the people, and people will then buy more, start buying more and more, which will stimulate then producers to produce more and more to satisfy this increased demand. So you can do that through the money, through the monetary policy, but you can do it through fiscal policy much more efficiently. So the Keynesians believe in this fiscal theory, fiscal approach, and we've seen today this so-called historic fiscal stimulus bill worth $2 trillion, which is essentially a list of giveaways, financial. How shall I put it? Free money given to various social groups in this society, individuals, firms, corporations, and so on, bailouts and loans, and cash giveaways to the people. So that's fiscal policy. You throw $1.5 trillion at the economy and then hope piously that people will use that money to buy more stuff, and by buying more stuff stimulate the production of new goods and services, and that the impending recession that we can expect in the next quarter will be moderated in that way, or made less severe or less deep. So that's a fiscal stimulus, and the Keynesians, after John Maynard Keynes, are the main proponents of this theory, and now pretty much everybody believes in fiscal policy, especially politicians. And you can see why, actually. Political economy of business cycle is pretty clear. It's always better, it's always more popular to give the free goodies to the people. You're gonna be very popular, and you are not taxing anybody. So that's another beauty of the anti-recession policy, according to Keynesians and other interventionists, that you give free stuff to everybody, like $1.5 trillion, and by a miracle you don't increase taxes at all to pay for that. What you do, you can guess, you sell more government bonds and you go deeper and deeper into debt in order to finance that. So this is debt-financed fiscal stimulus. So that's the best of both worlds for a politician. You increase the amount of goodies that you give to the people while reducing the pain, keeping taxes as they are, or even reducing them through the recession. So the Keynesian policy prescription is that you increase government spending in a recession while reducing taxes. And then you bring back the taxes and reduce spending only after the economy recovered and got out of recession. So that's the most popular, the canonical standard approach to the business cycle these days. The market is the problem. The market is inefficient. So the Keynesian theory is essentially that the business cycle is caused by by stupidity, by irrationality. Simply, people are, for a certain period of time, people are optimistic. They buy and sell more stuff. Consumers spend. Producers invest. Government taxes and spends. Everything is hunky dory, and then all of a sudden, people got panicky. People got pessimistic. People start sell-offs start on the stock market and in other markets. Consumers start hoarding money instead of using money to increase saving, investment, and consumption and stimulate the economy. So this flow of the money in the economic system uh, recedes, and this leads to a recession. So the first part is called the bull market. Everybody is buying, everybody wants to participate. So you heard about these terms. Bull market is a pessimistic phase of the business cycle, and then bear market is when everybody is selling off, everybody is pessimistic, everybody is panicking even. So this is psychological propensity of people, which is impossible to predict and to remedy. It's simply the way people are and the way society is. And then the only thing that we can do is actually, once it happens, when this mechanism gets going of people freaking out and people undermining their own economic well-being, to step in with the government and to make the best of the situation, to try and remedy the situation by increasing government spending, by gradually and slowly calming down the panic, increase infrastructure investment to absorb the unemployed people who were fired and laid off actually during a recession, and to recover after that. So you need the government intervention to solve the problem of the business cycle caused by the markets. So that's the canonical approach. That's the main and most popular approach to the business cycle theory, which is characterized by a strong belief in government policy as an efficient remedy for the market failure of business cycle. The second approach is actually to say, and some economists believe this, that business cycle is caused not by the failure of the free market, but rather by misguided government interventions. So government is the problem, and solution for the recession is not to try and moderate it, not to try and solve it, not to try and make it less painful. It's actually to let it be, to allow recession to run its course in order to eliminate a certain amount of production and investment that was unnecessary and harmful to begin with, and to cleanse from the inside the entire economic system. So the most important theory of the business cycle of that kind is the theory that economists Mises and Hayek developed. So their theory is that most recessions, most business cycles appear because of the monetary policy, misguided monetary policy by the central banks. More precisely, misguided manipulation of the interest rates, or the interference with the market mechanism at the point of interest rates policy. So why is that the case, and why the government monetary policy can create problems? According to Mises and Hayek and many others, is that interest rates are very important, that they are not arbitrary numbers in an economy. What interest rates tells you is the social rate of time preference. That means interest rate is an aggregate number read from the market, read out from the market, or reached from the market that tells you how strong preference for present income people have vis-a-vis future income, how impatient people are about the future, how much of their current income, real economic value that they have, they're ready to save and invest for future production, which means how much they're willing to sacrifice present current consumption for a promise of future consumption. That's actually what saving and investment means. It means sacrificing present enjoyment in exchange for a credible promise of future enjoyment in a certain period of time. So the interest rate is a measure of this relative impatience. Higher interest rate says that people require higher premium for foregoing present money. So you can think actually of the financial markets as the time markets, markets in which present goods are traded against future goods. Okay, so when I lend you $100, I provide you with $100 of present goods, current money that you can use to purchase consumer goods right away. So that's a present good or present income. What I get in exchange? I get in exchange a promise of a greater quantity of future goods. Why the quantity of future goods that I get in exchange has to be higher than the quantity of present goods that I provide right now? Because people prefer, all other things being equal, people prefer present satisfaction to future satisfaction. So that's the famous law of the time preference. The social rate of time preference is positive, which means that people prefer present consumption to future consumption. So if I give you $100 right now, I'm foregoing $100 worth of current consumer satisfaction right now for a promise of a $105 or $106 or $107 of future consumer satisfaction in 3 months or 6 months or 1 year. So if I ask you for a higher future amount of money that you will pay me back as a compensation for $100 now, then we say that you have to pay higher interest rate. So higher interest rate means that the rate of social rate of time preference is higher. People ask for higher compensation. In order for me to sacrifice something now, you will have to pay me more in the future. So and the interest rate is a measure of this willingness to sacrifice present consumption through savings and investment. This is the key, to sacrifice the present consumption through saving and investment for future consumption. Lower the interest rates, lower the social rate of time preference will be, which means that less impatient people will be about the future. Okay, so now this is a very fine equilibrium. This is one of the key, according to Mises Ihai, one of the key mechanisms that coordinate production and consumption over time. The key argument is that the production is time-consuming process. Production requires that the provision and supply of goods and services has to be continuously maintained over a protracted period of time. So you have to provide, if you're setting up a manufacturing plant to make automobiles, you have to provide a flow of services in the factor markets, the flow of factors such as construction machines and workers who are going to produce cars, and to purchase or rent the machinery for your manufacturing plant, and to purchase the services of maintaining the machines, and to purchase the electricity and so on. So you have to coordinate very finely and to set up very finely the quantity of resources that you need to consume in your business enterprise over a period of time in order to produce something that you will then sell on the market and receive revenue and hopefully profit. So then the interest rates are the key signals for you. The interest rates are the prices of present goods that you have to pay. If the interest rate is correct, then you will know whether you can afford to borrow money on the market. If interest rate is lower, you're going to borrow more, and then a certain business project might look profitable if you can borrow at 2%. If it's 3%, maybe. If it's 4%, no way. Now, you can now see what the problem here might be. The problem here might be, what if for whatever reason this mechanism fails? The government does something to the market system that makes this measuring stick, the interest rates, not to be a good measure of the social rate of time preference. That the real interest rate, the real average interest rate on the market for 6 month loans, for example, is 4%. That's how much, on average, people want to sacrifice, how great a proportion of their income they want to sacrifice for 6 months postponement of their consumer enjoyment. This willingness is reflected in 4% interest rate. Imagine that for some reason, and if your business project can survive with 4% interest rate, then you're okay. If it cannot, then you shouldn't be borrowing money, because you will fail. Eventually, the interest rate will have to go up and you will fail. So now, what's going to happen? What happens actually that falsifies the interest rate? So this is the theory of the falsification of interest rates, artificial lowering of the interest rates. So government increases the money supply. By increasing the money supply, that floods the credit market. So remember what I said before, what governments do, they would simply buy government bonds that private banks and financial institutional investors keep on their balance sheets, and they would flood the market with the new cash freshly created. So the banks then will have a greater amount of cash. So this increase in the amount of financial capital is then mistaken for a new savings that people wanted voluntarily to provide. So what's going to happen then? What's going to happen then is actually that people haven't changed their preferences about consumption and saving and investment. So they will still spend 90% of their income and want to save only 10% of their income. So people will spend on consumer goods. Consumer goods industries will grow as before. So see, in a normal market system, the only way for an economy to increase the amount of investment at a given level of technological development is for the time preference to change, for people to decide, thus far I spent 90% of my income and saved and invested only 10%. Now I decide that I'm going to sacrifice more. I'm ready to spend only $80 and I'm going to save $20. So this will lead then to a drop in interest rate, because the supply of money that could be devoted to the purposes of lending and borrowing, the amount of credit will increase, because the amount of saving that people voluntarily decided to forego has increased. Now, in our situation, that hasn't happened. But what has happened was actually that the government created a situation that looks like an increase in the savings rate. So now you can guess what's going to happen next. The interest rate will go down, and the interest rate will be a signal, a false signal, that there is more capital saved, ready to be invested through the credit market into business projects. So now everybody would be heavily leveraging. Everybody would be borrowing money. People whose business projects require the interest rate, who could not survive in the world in which the interest rates are 4%. Now the interest rate went down to 3%, they borrow money. They don't know actually in a due course the interest rates will have to go up, back up again, and that their business projects are actually not profitable. So that's the key source of the problem, that the only way to increase investment into long-term business projects is to reduce investment in short-term business projects and to reduce consumption right now. However, if the central bank artificially reduces the interest rate by printing money, then consumption continues as before, and production for immediate consumer goods continues as before, while people are increasing investment in the long-term business projects. So it shouldn't shock you then that in due course this mistake will be realized. People will start realizing that simply there is not enough scarce goods and factors of production, there is not enough raw materials, there is not enough electricity, there is not enough labor to complete all of these business projects in due course. And especially those heavily leveraged long-term business projects that are exploded in a bubble will be deflated in a recession. So these business projects that were unprofitable to begin with, that began only because people were deceived by these manipulated artificially low interest rates into believing that they are profitable, that these business projects have to be liquidated. And that's why you see typically always that the long-term manufacturing, the coal mining, real estate, construction business, stock market, all of these heavily capital intensive industries that require great investment, that they will suffer disproportionately in a recession. Why? Because they're much more sensitive to the variation on the interest rates. More leveraged you are, and more longer term your business project is, more vulnerable to this reversal of the business cycle you will be. So this is the theory that says essentially that artificial manipulation of the interest rates by the government creates an unsustainable business boom that will have to be deflated in due course. And then if this is the case, then a recession shouldn't be interfered with. Recession is actually a healthy cleansing mechanism whereby the unhealthy cancerous tissue of business investment that should not have been undertaken to begin with is liquidated. And the proponents of Keynesianism criticize heavily economists like Mises and Hayek for being liquidationists, for being heartless barbarians who want people to suffer. What they actually believe is that the investment that has been undertaken was unhealthy and unprofitable and made in error, because people were deceived by artificially low interest rates into believing that their business projects are more profitable than they were. Once the mistakes are discovered, it doesn't make any sense to try and prevent society from fixing its mistakes. So from this point of view, trying to interfere with a recession is just a way of trying to prevent society from fixing the obvious error that it made, or the errors made on a large scale. So now you can see we can go back to our initial problem, our initial puzzle from which everything started. How come that all these smart and capable entrepreneurs who excel in predicting the shape of the demand curves and the conditions of future demand, who adjust to the changes in demand, who provide goods and services on a continuous basis to their customers, how come that all of them become incapable idiots and start making mistakes all in the same time in a recession? The answer that this theory provides is actually they're deceived. They're like a computer that runs on the wrong data, like computer models that run on the wrong underlying data, just like, I must say, the epidemiological models, some of them that are used predicting millions of dead people here, and eventually turned out that the underlying data were wrong or doubtful, so then the final output is garbage. So garbage in, garbage out. So something similar is here, like the garbage in, garbage out. If entrepreneurs do not have a way of distinguishing between real reduction in the social rate of time preference. The real drop in the interest rate that signals a greater willingness of people to save and invest from artificial manipulation by the government by increasing the amount of newly created credit to the banks, then you will have garbage in, garbage out. You will have a large amount of speculative investment that will look profitable, that will look good for a while, but that will be unsustainable in the long run. And it will be unsustainable because simply there is not enough factors of production that are necessary to complete both the short-term projects that are not curtailed, that are not reduced, and that are necessary to reduce in order to sustain this much longer production structure on the other hand. All these ambitious long-term business projects based on loans and leveraging, in order to sustain them, you have to sacrifice short-term production. You don't do it in this system of artificial government manipulation of interest rates. So then you have to abide by the market judgment, which is a recession. All these projects have to be scaled back, some of them to be liquidated, some of them to be completely abandoned, some of them to be just adjusted, and this process is costly. So Ludwig von Mises uses this metaphor of a master builder metaphor. Imagine that you are building a house, and then you have a certain number of bricks, and you made your calculation how many bricks you do have, and then you made your business plan. You made your plan of a house by using this calculation of whatever 15,000 bricks. And then you build the first floor and the second floor, and you're midway through your third floor, and you're just preparing to put on the roof, and you realized actually that your calculation was wrong, that you don't have 15,000, you have only 13,000 bricks. So now what you have to do in order for everything that you already did to make any sense, you have to make some house. Okay, but you don't have enough bricks to complete the third floor. You already ordered the material and people are already working on fixing the roof, but the roof works only if you have the third floor. You already pay the people, you already spend the money. What you do? You have to stop. You have to stop and to tear down the third floor, and then to try and make a more modest roof, different kind of roof over the second floor. And you will sacrifice, and it doesn't make any sense to say, but these people will lose jobs. Let's do something to help them. These roof builders who are making a roof that nobody needs anymore, that doesn't serve any useful purpose. It doesn't make, from a Misesian point of view, any sense to try and prop them up somehow artificially through business loans and through anything else, because they're doing the wrong kind of thing. That should be liquidated. So recession is just like this, foregoing the services of people who are making the roof for your unsustainable 3-floor edifice. And recession is painful exactly because many of the business projects that consume the resources, that consume the labor, that consume the raw materials, that consume the loans that you took in, will have simply to be liquidated, and all of these resources relocated in some new business enterprises. And this is costly and painful. And recession is actually just this process of rearranging the stuff, rearranging the deck, rearranging the resources, and moving them away from failed business projects into successful business projects. And it doesn't make any sense. It's very harmful to try and prevent this process by fiscal policy, for example. That would be just like trying to intoxicate your master builder to continue building the house no matter what. So that doesn't make any sense. You're not going to finish the house. You're not going to finish the building. By the same token, the economy is not going to recover if you start propping up the failed business projects. So this is a completely different way of looking at the business cycle that sees that the problem of business cycle doesn't have much to do with what happens at the level of the macroeconomy. I think aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and so on. And the way how to solve the problem is always to do something about the macroeconomy through monetary or fiscal policy. It's rather about trying to fix these imbalances and structural distortions that exist in the economy itself. And if you look at things that way, then any government intervention becomes much more problematic and much more difficult to sustain. Okay, that's just my simplest possible that I could do introduction into some different ways of thinking about the business cycle. Please give me some feedback. Please write on Canvas if you have any further questions for me or any thoughts and any observations. So I would be more than willing over the weekend to publish another brief video answering those questions and concerns that you might have. In the meantime, I will post the oh no, actually. So you have already the fourth assignment posted. So if you have any questions about that, please don't hesitate to contact me as well. So in the hope that all of you are well and good and in good spirits, and that you expect the end of the quarantine in a good mood. Bye bye, and I'll see you all on Tuesday with the next lecture. Bye bye.